Tonight on Greater Boston, from our studio at the Boston Public Library. American workers have seen some big wins recently with a strong labor market, more leverage with employers following the Great Resignation. But as inflation rages and corporations battle back for power where they can, will these changes last? Obama's head of the Labor Department's Wage and Hour Division, but not Biden's. We'll explain that. David Weil joins me. Then, what will President Biden's federal pardon for marijuana possession do across the nation, including here in Massachusetts? And what more is needed to right the many wrongs of the racist war on drugs? Former Massachusetts Cannabis Commissioner Shaleen joins me, along with one woman whose possession conviction followed her for years. The past few years have been a roller coaster for workers across the United States in just about every industry. So where are we now and where are we headed? We've gone from pandemic-induced job insecurity, losses for some, dangerous conditions for others, to the Great Resignation leading to leverage for better conditions, higher pay, and unions in some companies, including successful efforts at an Amazon and many Starbucks locations. And now, major changes could be ahead for the gig economy if the Department of Labor has its way. I'm joined by David Weil, former dean of the Heller School for Social Policy and Management at Brandeis and administrator of the Wage and Hour Division of the Labor Department for nearly 3 years under Barack Obama. He was tapped by Biden for the same job, but was voted down in March when Democratic Senators Manchin, Sinema, and Arizona's Mark Kelly joined Republicans in opposition. David, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
So my assessment, when I look at all the Republicans voting against you, and Sinema, Kelly, and Manchin, is that you had this radical position that existing laws, even if CEOs didn't like them, should be enforced. It seemed to be that simple to me. Was it?
Yeah, I think it did ultimately come down to that. I mean, there were certainly some of the hyperbole from my opponents about me rewriting the law or regulations implied that I was going to go beyond the law. But I think the reality is people knew, I knew where the on switches were in the department, and that we would enforce the law as we did in the Obama administration.
One of those switches related to overtime for workers that I know some of your opponents didn't like. What exactly had you done that had incurred their wrath?
Well, what we did was, in response to President Obama, said we needed to basically make sure that the overtime rule covered the people that it was intended to. And over time, and particularly because of some changes that happened in the Bush administration, overtime protections eroded. And so by the time we were looking at revising them and updating them, only 7% of salaried workers in this country were still covered, protected by the overtime policies. The vast majority of workers who had historically been eligible for overtime no longer were eligible. And so we did a deep dive, as you have to do, with a regulatory change in looking at how do we get people back to the kinds of coverage that Congress envisioned us to have, and to make sure people who worked long hours received overtime. And that's exactly what we did. We went through the whole process. And I think we came to a very reasonable standard about how we determined who was eligible, and then made sure that it continued to update over time. And both of those things, again, led to a fair amount of opposition from the employer community.
And another sin you apparently committed was taking sides in the are gig workers, employees, or independent contractors. We know there was a $100 million war on the ballot over that in California. We almost had a very expensive ballot war here, but ultimately the question was knocked off the ballot. Again, your position there was that these people are employees where they have far greater spectrum of protections rather than independent contractors, which the Ubers, Lyfts et al. Want, because obviously they're cheaper and have far fewer protections, correct?
That's right. That's right. But in fact, what we were doing with that was really going to the basic question of who should be protected by our laws, not just gig workers, but generally. One of the things that many people have seen over time is more and more workers are being misclassified as independent contractors, not just the Lyft and the Uber drivers,
Sure.
but even people who are doing home care, people who are on construction sites, people, throughout our economy. This became essentially a way to get out of minimum wage, get out of overtime requirements, and also slip out of things like worker comp coverage, unemployment insurance, even protections against sexual harassment fall apart if you're called an independent contractor. So while, the lightning rod and certainly some of the people who really came after me when President Biden nominated me focused on the gig work, what we were doing was once again just saying, hey, this is the law. This is the Fair Labor Standards Act, one of our most fundamental set of worker protections that we just want to make sure does the work that Congress originally intended it to do.
David, I assume it's a coincidence, but maybe it isn't. The Labor Department under Marty Walsh today took a position on this gig worker situation very close to where you are. My understanding is it's not a formal regulation, so it may have less impact, but it attempts to do what you believe should have been done all along, no?
No, I think that's right, and I'm still studying it. It's 180 pages, and as these things always are. But I think it does a couple of really important things. First of all, during the Trump administration put out its own rule, and you're quite right. It's what's called an interpretive rule. It gives guidance, but it's not like the overtime rule. It doesn't have that strength. But the Trump administration really pulled out just two of the kinds of criteria that Congress intended the Department of Labor to use to decide who is and who isn't an independent contractor. So what the Biden administration rolled out today, the proposed rule, first of all, rolls that back and then says, well, what should be the criteria? And in my view, what they've done is basically go back to the basic law. And they go back to what courts have said, and they say, it's based on what's called the economic realities of the relationship between the worker and the person who's gaining from their work, which in many, many cases is an employer under our law. And I think what this proposed rule does is get us back to that legal standard that is defined by the law and allows people to have the protections that again, Congress meant them to have going way back to 1938.
David Weil, I don't want to leave people with the wrong impression. The war on David Weil has not been the only attack on wage and hour protections. I read something you said about the capacity of that division you headed under Obama to pursue violations 80 years ago as compared to today. Could you make that comparison for us, if you would?
Yeah, it is one of the biggest problems facing wage and hour in the Labor Department generally, and that is enough resources to get the investigators out there to do the work of enforcement. And I think if you look at the number of investigators that were present in the field at the time that President Roosevelt passed the original Fair Labor Standards Act, relative to the number of workplaces, it was something on the order of 54 times the number we currently have. There are currently less than 800 investigators that the Department of Labor has available to do that work. And that's because it's been very difficult for Congress to get it together to appropriate the money you need to do the kind of enforcement that our laws call out for. We fought for that in the Obama administration, and I know it's been the same kind of fight during the Biden administration.
Can we talk about this show's favorite Democratic Senator, Joe Manchin? He voted for you in 2014 when you were nominated by Barack Obama. What changed in between?
Well, I think what changed was there was a multi-million-dollar campaign waged against me, really from two sources. One was the International Franchise Association, who opposed me the first time, the time that Senator Manchin did vote in favor of my nomination. They came out against swinging this time. And then you had the platform companies who were also pouring a lot of money into trying to soften those three senators on supporting me, and mischaracterizing my position. I can tell you without going too much into the inside baseball, I actually met with Senator Manchin on 2 occasions. It was certainly my impression after the second meeting we had his support. The night of my confirmation, I really assumed that I would be, I was packing my bags and ready to go. Senator Sinema was actually the first to flip her vote and vote against me, and Senator Kelley quickly followed, and then Senator Manchin also decided he wasn't going to follow, I guess, on that sword, and also opposed my nomination.
Is there a moral to the story apart from the fact that to those 53 senators, business contributions matter more than protecting the rights of American workers, or is that it?
Well, I think, this is, I guess, an age-old story of very powerful economic interests fighting against worker protections. And, this was the 2020 version of that, or 2021 version of that. And I think what is always the struggle is to help people understand just how rights that many people assume we have at work, like the basic right to be paid for the work you do, are jeopardized in just far too many situations. I've often said, I've studied this as an academic for a long, long time, but once I was in the position in the Obama administration, I saw jaw-dropping violations of the most basic labor standards, things that we all take for granted, but sadly are not the case. And the economic interest pushing against that, whether it is the platform companies or other powerful companies who use a lot of different methods to get out of their legal obligations, that's still unfortunately very much the story. And it's the uphill battle that people have to tell about the importance of these protections and the powerful interests that push against it.
Speaking of powerful interests, before you go, I think most people watching know the public approval of labor unions in this country is as high as it's been in roughly 50 years, close to 7 in 10. I think the places that most people identify is obviously the Amazon warehouse in New York and the dozens of Starbucks locations around the country, including quite a few here. Here is the lead anti-union spokesperson, who also happens to be the head of the company, Howard Schultz, earlier this year on the effort to unionize his workers. Here he is.
My faith and confidence in the future of Starbucks is based on my faith and confidence in you, not some outside force that's going to dictate or disrupt what we are.
David, in the last minute we have, can Starbucks serve as a model for organizing outside the barista world, or are their workplaces too small and too aberrational to be models for other organizing?
No, I think they can be a model, and I think they can be a model with a number of respects. It takes a lot of bravery to come out and support a union in the environment we have. It takes bravery basically to assert your rights to get a minimum wage, let alone get a union. And what I find remarkable about the Starbucks workers, and I had a chance to meet with several of their organizers a couple weeks ago, is how they really built this from the ground up. And they built it because they have faced a whole range of problems at the workplace for a long time and were quite frankly fed up about it. And they built the union somewhat in the way that unions used to be built, really from the ground up, from their own experience, with a lot of passion, a lot of creativity, and a lot of bravery. And I think they've been very strategic in how they have played out the campaign, how they're preparing ultimately to bargain. And it resonates. I have to tell you, I grew up in a small town in northeastern Colorado, a very red part of Colorado. I found out last week the Starbucks workers in Greeley, Colorado, voted 20-1 for a union, and it's remarkable. And I think it is that kind of grassroots willingness to do this, fueled by many, many years of stagnating wages and mistreatment, that I feel fairly optimistic we're going to see more of in what is still a very difficult environment to organize.
I hope you're right. And by the way, I would have voted for you had I had the opportunity. David Weil, thanks so much for your time and your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Next up, when President Biden issued an executive order pardoning all prior federal offenses of simple marijuana possession, a major moment for a government that still treats marijuana like heroin and LSD as so-called Schedule I drugs. But it had no formal impact in the states where the vast majority of convictions were obtained. So just what does that mean for people across the country and here in Massachusetts, where, as you know, possession of up to an ounce of cannabis has been legal since 2016? And how far will it go toward addressing racial disparities, with black people 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession in this state? I'm joined by Cheryle Kelley, who was convicted of marijuana possession when she was a teenager, and Shaleen, who co-wrote the 2016 recreational marijuana ballot question, including leading the equity-related sections before serving on the Cannabis Control Commission. She's now chief executive of the cannabis policy think tank, Parabola Center. Shaleen, Cheryle, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Shaleen, can I start with you? What's the significance of President Biden's proclamation?
Well, it's hugely significant because he is the first president to acknowledge that we need to start repairing the harms of the drug war. In terms of the concrete impact, it is somewhat small. It only applies to federal possession charges, which is about 6,500 people. So a small number of people relative, but it will make a big difference in their lives. And hopefully it will lead to more pardons at the state level and pardons for broader marijuana-related offenses as well.
And he, by the way, he did urge all governors to emulate, to take the same position he did on state convictions. And one candidate for governor, namely Maura Healey here, said she would. But one more thing for you, Shaleen. I know 6,500 on the federal level and plus whatever number in D.C. The vast majority of arrests and convictions for marijuana possession through the years, the overwhelming number are in the states, correct?
That's correct. So the biggest impact would be if Maura Healey was to become governor and do this at the state level, and also if this was expanded at the federal level to apply to people who had sold cannabis, which is also something that is racially disproportionate in the way it's enforced. So those could be potential next steps.
Cheryle, how old were you when you were arrested for marijuana possession?
I was 15 years old.
15 years old. And
Yeah.
what impact did that have on your life in the intervening years, that arrest?
It was hard for me to get jobs. You know, they always wanted to do a drug test. Also housing, you know, they always, they want to do a background check. So I was always facing either or sometimes both at the same time.
I know this is speculative, but if a governor of this state 20 years ago, when you were just coming out of your teens, had done what Joe Biden did the other day, but did it on the state level, have you thought in the last week or so about how your life would have been different?
Yes, I mean, you know, I would have never went through what I went through. Things would have been a lot easier as far as getting jobs. I would have never had a record. I would have never had any issue, even with housing.
So
things like that, you know, being a single mom, facing those were very hard on me.
Shaleen, one of the other things, my understanding is, one of the things Joe Biden did not do is, even though as a candidate, he promised he'd fight for decriminalization. I don't believe he embraced that in the statement the other day, but he did embrace some examination of this absurdity that I mentioned before, that under federal rules, Schedule I drugs include heroin, LSD, and marijuana. He wants that re-looked at, correct?
That's correct. And I think that he actually approached this in just the right order, because we want to make sure that what happened to Cheryle doesn't happen to anyone else. We stop arresting people, and that people like Cheryle aren't facing these employment, housing, and other barriers that she mentioned. That should be the highest priority. As far as examining descheduling, that is going to take some time. I think that if we descheduled with no coherent plan, that could put up to 90% of the business businesses in Massachusetts out of business. It would be taken over by Amazon and Big Tobacco, for example. So I'm glad that that's something that's being approached in a slow, methodical way.
Can you explain that to me? I wasn't aware of that in maybe 30 seconds. Why would it allow the biggest of the big boys to get involved if there was descheduling or whatever you described a minute ago?
Yes, because Amazon and Big Tobacco have endorsed legalization proposals, but they haven't entered the industry yet because it's still federally illegal.
I see.
And so if we were to decriminalize or deschedule marijuana, meaning make it legal at the federal level, they would then enter the industry. So we have to be prepared for that.
And can that be drafted? Can the descheduling, if that were to happen, be drafted in such a way to keep them out of totally controlling the industry like
Absolutely.
Jeff Bezos controls everything else?
That's exactly what we could do and what we should do.
Yeah, and by the way, we should mention 70% of the American people support legalization, just to put in context. You know, Cheryle, back to you. You had your record expunged. When did that happen?
That happened last year, and I got that expunged through the Mass Cultivated program that I am grateful to be a current fellow of.
And what effect has the expungement of your record on marijuana possession? What is that? What doors has that opened to you?
That opened up a lot of doors for me. It opened up. I was able to work in cultivation, retail. You know, working with hands-on with the cannabis.
And my understanding is you were a beneficiary. Correct me if I'm wrong, Cheryle. Of the social equity provision in the law, which, by the way, I believe was authored by Shaleen Title. Is that right? You are a social equity?
Yes. Thank you, Shaleen, for that. Yes, I am a social equity applicant. That opened up a lot of doors in the near future. You know, I can have a license to have retail delivery on my own cultivation site.
That's terrific. You know, Shaleen, back to you for a second. When Charlie Baker was asked about this, what Joe Biden had done the other day, he said he's comfortable, I'm not putting words in his mouth, but the gist of it is, with the current law, I think passed in 2018, which Cheryle benefited from, where an individual can apply for expungement, I guess, of their record. And my understanding, only 20% of the people who have applied have actually had it granted, which is troubling. And I don't know what percentage have not applied to begin with. We asked Maura Healey today what her position was, including what would the process be. Here's part of what she said. She basically repeated what she said to the media last week. As governor, I would move to pardon state convictions for simple marijuana possession, modeled after the steps taken today by President Biden. And while she didn't say explicitly whether the expungement, for lack of a better word, or the pardon would be automatic, obviously having it across the board, as opposed to asking people to apply for it, guarantees that it affects a far broader percentage of people, obviously, right?
Yeah, without a doubt, that would be an improvement over what we have now.
Well, you know, also, there's also a racial equity part of this. I mentioned the lead of the show, but let me put some numbers up. According to the Civil Liberties Union from 2020, marijuana possession arrest rates in Massachusetts per 100,000 people. Overall population, 4.5 out of 100,000. As you see, white population, 3.7, and black population, roughly 3.5 to 4 times as much. And the point they make, I should be very clear about this, for the same number of offenses, whether you're white, black, Latino, that sort of thing. So obviously the best way to deal with that racial inequity, again, Shaleen, is a blanket pardon or expungement rather than individuals having to figure out how to apply and then possibly getting it granted, correct?
Absolutely correct. And we depended on that study when we created the social equity program. And it's so great to hear, Cheryle, that was helpful for you, even though nothing is going to make up for the harm that was committed. But I think we need to keep doing those studies, not just for possession, but again, for sales as well, because it really does affect people's lives. And we now have corporations that are making billions of dollars for doing exactly the same thing. So no one should be facing punitive consequences now for that.
You know, Cheryle, I should have asked you the same question at the top that I asked Shaleen, is even though there's no formal impact on people with state convictions, with a state record, what did you think of what the president had to say the other day?
I was just, happy about it. It just opens up a lot of doors for, myself and other people like myself.
And it basically, it's a mindset change, doesn't it? I mean, using that bully pulpit, Cheryl, does crack minds open for people.
Yes, because it used to be frowned upon. So, I don't have anyone really like looking over my shoulder or you shouldn't be doing that or, I'm just happy to speak about it now.
Well, I wish you good luck in your business, Cheryl. Before you go, Shaleen, if you were advising Joe Biden, what's the next step you would take in this effort to get to either decriminalization or outright legalization on the federal level? What should he be doing next?
I would make sure to create a coherent plan to transition for national legalization. I would extend the pardon to people who had sold cannabis. I would call on Congress to send me a bill to legalize, and then I would apologize for my role in the drug war if I was President Biden.
Yeah, he had some impact on that in the 1990s when he was a senator. Shaleen Title, Cheryle Kelley, thank you both. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, too. Have a good day.
That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow. Ken Burns joins me on a searing new documentary on how the U.S. responded to the Holocaust and the troubling parallels he's seeing today. Plus, what Atlantic puffins can tell us about the global climate crisis. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget Ukraine.
Wait, did I just commit a crime? Hey folks, I'm Edgar B. Harwick III from GBH's Curiosity Desk, where you ask questions and I find answers. Today's question comes courtesy of Betty Davis from Gloucester, Massachusetts, who wants to know, is it in fact a crime to remove these labels? Now you find these guys on pillows, mattresses, even a lot of winter coats, and the reason why is because you cannot see what is inside of those items. Now today, pillows, for example, are usually stuffed with feathers or cotton or some kind of synthetic material. But according to Maggie Terry, back in the day, they put some pretty gnarly stuff in the stuffing.
I mean, it used to be years ago, they'd throw anything they wanted to into the bedding. Newspapers, dirty rags.
Horsehair, used hospital or hotel mattresses, corn husks.
Sweepings off the floor, part of their lunches, droppings, I mean, anything.
For starters, that's disgusting, and furthermore, it's dangerous and unhealthy. So today, a lot of states require these labels that tell you what is inside of the item, and it is against the law to remove them. Sort of. Retailers and manufacturers can be fined if they remove the labels, but once you buy it or I buy it, if you read closely, most of these end with the line, "except by the consumer." So there you have it. Feel free to rip away. Don't forget to follow and tell us what you are curious about because, hey, I might just look into it for you. I'm Edgar B. Harwick III. Stay curious out there.